Honestly, when it comes to doing movie reviews, I'm not the best around it. It's obvious that my audience doesn't really care for them. But here we are again, talking about Five Nights at Freddy's, and this time it's the cinematic counterpart. Look, I've always talked about the FNAF property on my channel here and there, and while I'm not the biggest fan of the series, especially with how the games have become more and more out there, but the concept and ideas of the games were at the very least entertaining, and if nothing else, they did give us some fun designs for horror games. And this is where we come to the movie. At the moment, the review scores from the movie are 25% from critics and 89% from positivity from the audience of Rotten Tomatoes. You can already tell there's going to be some fun times ahead, boys and girls, with this review. You see, this is why no one trusts critics. Then again, if you look towards some of these reviews like IGN, who complain is too much plot. Too much plot, too much water. Never change, IGN. Never change. If you want to really get into the nitty-gritty of the movie, it's more or less a loose adaptation from the first game, where we follow the character of Mike Schmidt as he tries to get a new job in order to provide for his sister and make sure that his aunt doesn't take her away from him. As you can imagine, Mike here gets dragged into the good old Fazbear's Pizzeria, where he acts as security guard for the place with the animatronics haunting it. Coming out of the gate, the one thing I'll say is that considering that the core of the first FNAF game was more or less steeped into the background lore of it, and it wasn't really a character-driven narrative, obviously when you have a game like that, you're going to take a few more creative liberties with it when you adapt it, especially when it comes to the characters of the movie. It's why we got the character Vanessa brought into the mix as well. On that front, I can understand the decision somewhat. And don't get me wrong, for the most part, I like the characters. At least they weren't jackasses, unlike, say, Ruby or Life is Strange. And hey, Josh Hutcherson, who plays Mike Schmidt, isn't a terrible actor and played the role well with it. Acting-wise, no one was really a plank of wood, and...
But, you know, it's just a theory.
Of course they had to put him in this. Regardless of my past misgivings with MatPat, it makes sense to put him in this movie, but I still don't like it. What about the scares? Well, there's something I need to confess. For a horror movie, I didn't find the movie all that scary. Now, don't get me wrong, I greatly appreciate all the effort that was put into the animatronics, and they look almost exactly like their game counterparts. I guess that's what you get when you have Jim Henson's Creature Shop into the suits, and the atmosphere really works well with the times that they're in the pizzeria. So if they managed to knock it out of the park with the look of the animatronics and the atmosphere of the location, why didn't I think this was scary? Truth be told, the FNAF games aren't all that scary to me. It's not the concept, mind you, that I take issue with. It was more or less the fact that the games had to rely a lot more on the jump scare factor, as well as the horrific background lore of the games. That's how the games were able to become a success at the time when they came out. And funnily enough, their horror factor really wasn't the reason why the games got popular. Then again, the characters and the amount of fan art that spawned from the games did push them into the limelight. As for the movie, while it tries to be scary and even at times have a bit of a grindhouse feel to it, a lot of the times where I was supposed to be scared, I was more or less laughing. Like, for example, there's a scene in the movie where the aunt basically hires a bunch of goons to go mess up the pizzeria, since it's part of Mike's job to keep the building intact. And she wants him to get fired from his job. Well, as you can imagine, the three idiots and the girl who was a double-crosser and spy for the aunt get killed. And it's supposed to be a point where the movie is trying to be intimidating, but the execution of the killings is more comical than anything else. Let's give the biggest example of it. The double-crossing girl enters the building trying to find her brother and the two other idiots. But the moment she enters, she spies a mysterious child in the hallways. And what does she do? She follows him into what appears to be the animatronic workshop, where we see Freddy Fazbear himself just standing there, menacingly. Kids nowhere in sight. So what does she do? She grabs a chair, gets right up into Freddy's grill, and a hand leaps out of Freddy's mouth, and we cut to a scene where the shadows show her being bitten in half.
Was that the bite of 87?
Now, I'm not asking for people to be completely logical. I'm not from Community. Not every character is going to act like a completely rational human being, especially in high-stress situations. But these sort of actions are more laughable than anything else because it's just like, you stupid! Wow, that was a really good life decision there, lady. Don't get me wrong, as a piece of film, I enjoyed the movie a lot. But as a horror film, it didn't do anything for me. There was another scene where Mike is communicating with the ghost children, making a deal to trade his sister Abby to get back his kidnapped brother. I don't know how the ghosts were able to do that, but he realizes, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be a dick and give away my sister. And he tells them no afterwards. We then get this scene where the ghost kids are attacking him. And again, I'd take it seriously if the kids weren't acting like Naruto ninjas, appearing and disappearing and slicing him up with their fingernails? The only one that makes kinda sense is the ghost that's possessing Foxy with a hook in his hand. Regardless of that, I did find the movie to be, at the very least, fun to watch, save for... If you want my honest opinion, considering the source material, this video game adaptation isn't great, but isn't bad either. Even if you want to look at something like, say, the Mario movie in comparison, I'd have to rank it lower than the Mario movie, but only because the Mario movie had a bit more going on and was actually keeping to its genre. I wouldn't say the FNAF movie is a terrible movie, but I also wouldn't call it a great movie either. It's mid. Then again, I'm not really the target demographic for the movie since I'm not a huge fan of the games. I can imagine that the film will do well because of that fan base. That being said, this video is also talking about the critics of the film. And don't get me wrong, as a critic myself, I understand the importance of criticism. But some of the criticism I've seen is honestly a bit more laughable than the movie itself. Personal taste notwithstanding, you can always tell there's a big disconnect whenever you see such a difference between the critics and the fans. And I have to stress this, even though I'm pointing this stuff out, I don't want people to go after these critics. That does nothing to help the situation and only makes the fandom look worse. One review I saw, though, essentially calling the movie bad, never actually goes into why it was bad. The most we get is, the plot is as dingy and full of holes as a 10-year-old pair of underpants, and about as much fun to watch. That is so enlightening, thank you very much. Other gems include collection of jump scares, convoluted plot, thin plot. This is probably the issue I have with video game movies nowadays, and I'm not sure if it's a product of the film themselves or the people who watch them. Since a lot of the time, video game movies are mostly supposed to be love letters to the fans, with the idea of opening up the property to a new audience. The same idea applies to that of the One Piece live-action adaptation, and honestly, from what I've seen, it did just that. It opened the franchise to a new audience and made an appreciation for the fans. Not so much for the FNAF movie, though. Now, while I did find the reviews for this movie to be a bit off-kilter and not actually represent the film correctly, I myself have to point out the film does have a major weakness. That being, there's little appeal for the audience outside the fandom. You'll have cameos from people who are considered in FNAF's fandom, such as MatPat or Koryax Kenshin as the cab driver.
Where to? Why do I always get the weirdos?
But for someone who's not familiar with the latter and who's been drinking a bottle of bourbon a day to forget the former, that doesn't really appeal to me. Like I said, the film was more comedic to me than scary, which is also an issue with other horror-based properties that get adapted in the movies. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Doom! For a long time, these movies were probably some of the more panned ones when it came to video game adaptations. There needs to be more to the films than just the property itself. And that isn't to say that I found the film to be bad, nor did I find it to be boring, but when a horror movie is attempting to be scary and have a lot of effort put into the look of the iconic animatronics, it feels wasteful. Getting more into my own personal critiques, this movie makes the mistake of having the animatronics be friendly to Abby, Mike's sister, especially after killing a group that trashed the place. Kinda killed whatever tension the movie was having up in there. And then there was some interesting writing choices, especially from Vanessa. "If you bring her again, I will shoot you!" Then there's one scene where she's talking to Mike at a riverbank, telling him that he shouldn't be sleeping at work, and then throws his sleep medication into the river, and I was like, what? I get the movie is trying to make Vanessa suspicious, but it took me way too out of it. Especially since she's a cop in this, and there's no way a cop would act like this, and Mike's like, huh, that's weird. At least by the time of the super fun sleepover party with the animatronics that are supposed to have dead kids' bodies in them, how they don't stink is beyond me, Mike's asking some questions, so good on that. In all honesty, if you were to ask me, I think the movie went a little too personal with Mike. Back when the original game came out, we didn't know who Mike Schmidt really was at the time. At most, we knew he was just some nobody who was after some pizza and made terrible life choices. You almost had a bit of a blank slate here, and hell, you could have just had him be in debt to some people and thus have a last-ditch effort for him to get back on his feet. You could still have a group of idiots being killed by the animatronics, although Mike wouldn't know about that, showcasing that the animatronics are still a threat. But then you have Mike beginning to investigate into the pizzeria's past and learning about the fate of the animatronics and kids. I think it would have been a much better story and would have opened up a lot more dynamic plot, all the while keeping that PG-13 movie rating. Then again, it's obvious that the film was more or less targeting a younger fan base, even confirmed by the director of the film himself. The film doesn't appeal to everyone, and that's perfectly fine. I find it funny, and I can appreciate the hard work put into the film's designs, as well as the animatronics to be faithful to the original. And I'm not being a nitpicker when it comes to the plot, because I don't care. It's a funny movie to me, which, hey, I got my own worth out of it. But considering the overwhelming support for the movie from the fans, it's obvious there was a specific demographic in mind for the film. it's not for me, and that's fine. To me, it's a movie that, while not offensive, it certainly will only appeal to its niche audience, and there's nothing wrong with having a niche audience. In fact, I think it's a good thing. But what are your thoughts? Let me know down below if you liked the movie or not. I'm MangaKamen, and be sure to check out my last video on Ghost Trick. It's a great game and video, and I would appreciate if you guys would watch it since YouTube isn't interested in promoting it. Happy Halloween, everyone!